Hi, I'm Dr. Jeremy Neal. I'm a professor of philosophy at Houston Baptist University. Today I want to talk about Plato's Phaedo. It's an important dialogue that's one of the 5 dialogues that constitute the last days of Socrates. The 5 dialogues include such famous dialogues as the Euthyphro, the Apology, the Meno, the Crito, and the Phaedo. The Phaedo is a dialogue that takes place on Socrates' last day. The ship has returned from Delos, so the story goes, and it is the day that has been designated for Socrates to drink hemlock, thus being executed at the will of the Athenian legal authorities. Now, on his last day, Socrates has gathered around him a small number of his disciples and friends. And of course, they naturally fall into a discussion of the possibility of life after death. And so Socrates and his friends engage in a discussion in which Socrates endeavors to demonstrate the immortality of the soul. And there are several arguments that Socrates offers in support of his conclusion that the soul is immortal. And I want to talk about a few of these arguments here. Notice first of all, though, that Socrates believes that he has a soul, and this is a very large assumption. Socrates is, speaking as Plato's mouthpiece, a dualist. What seems to be meant by Socrates in this sense is that his soul is something special, something that is not inextricably tied to his body. So it becomes clear in the course of the dialogue that Socrates believes that his soul will live on after he is dead. In fact, he thinks that his soul will in some way separate itself from the body at the time of death. For Socrates, death appears to be the separation of soul and body. And upon its separation, he thinks that his soul will go to the realm of the forms. If you know your Plato, you know that Plato believed in the doctrine of recollection, knowledge as recollection, that is, and he believed that prior to this life, in some way, the soul had a connection or communion with the realm of the forms. Once it became embodied, however, the soul forgot this and only had a tenuous connection to the realm of the forms by means of observation of things around it and by learning about the nature of the world around it. However, upon death, Socrates believes that the soul, that his soul will return to the realm of the forms and that he will once again have communion with the forms. And so, in this Socratic heaven, so to speak, in the hope of it, he is very excited. He is looking forward to death. In fact, he thinks that philosophy and the art of doing philosophy is a matter of preparing for death. Because by engaging in philosophy, and especially the ascetic lifestyle that he associates with philosophy, namely depriving oneself of too heavy an engagement with one's bodily desires, ensuring that one is not overly tied to physical things, he thinks that the soul will prepare itself for death by doing this and will enable itself to depart from the body and journey to the realm of the forms. Some of his followers and friends are not so enthused about this. They're not so certain that this could, in fact, be the case. And so Socrates embarks upon a series of arguments to demonstrate that indeed the soul is an immortal thing. One objection that his friends raise is the possibility that the soul might merely dissipate upon the death of the body, rather than go to some other realm or dimension. And in response to this, Socrates offers what I'm going to call the argument from opposites, or the argument from recycling. Both of those names I think are appropriate. Socrates says to his friends and followers that if you look at the world around you, you can tell that things get recycled. So, for instance, dogs are born into this world, they live and they die. But when they die, their bodies get recycled. They don't cease to exist altogether. Human beings, similarly, if you look at what happens to their bodies when they die, it's not as though they die as such and are gone. Rather, it's that their bodies become other things. They become worm food. They degenerate into dust. The car that I drove today to work, the car that you drive on a regular basis, once upon a time was assembled car parts, or car parts in assembly. Now it is assembled, and at some point in the future it will journey to the junkyard where it will be torn apart and become once again car parts, but it won't cease to exist altogether. It will simply be recycled. And in this sense, Socrates argues that the soul too is recycled. So the soul is, in Socrates' view, something that can become another thing upon death. It makes sense since we look at the things around us and see that they get recycled. They don't just cease to exist entirely. It makes sense to think that the soul, too, since it is a really existing thing, and it is in Socrates' opinion, it makes sense to think that the soul, too, will simply get recycled upon death. And so this is one of the arguments that Socrates offers in the dialogue, the Phaedo, for the immortality of the soul. There are other arguments that Socrates offers as well, but I'm going to save those for another day and another discussion.